The lights of the Late Late Show pulsed with their usual brilliance, a spectacle carefully designed to disguise itself as spontaneity. Neon hues reflected off the polished floor, the band struck its rehearsed notes, and the audience clapped on command, like a chorus trained to perform joy. But tonight, beneath the laughter and the scripted charm, the air carried a different weight. Keanu Reeves walked onto the stage with that same understated presence that made him both invisible and unforgettable. He didn't swagger, didn't sell himself with forced energy. He simply existed, and the audience rose to its feet. They weren't applauding a celebrity, they were acknowledging a myth made flesh. Generosity, humility, grief, survival, all wrapped into one man who had, for decades, refused to play Hollywood's shallow games. James Corden, perched behind his desk, grinned broadly, his smile sharp as a blade wrapped in sugar. His job was to command attention, to set the tone, to remind every guest who the real star was. And tonight, he faced a guest he could neither overshadow nor control. "Ladies and gentlemen," Corden beamed, raising his voice above the roar. "The one, the only, the internet's boyfriend, Mr. Keanu Reeves." The crowd erupted again, some clapping, some shouting, some filming through their phones. Keanu nodded, bowed his head slightly, and took his seat. What should have been a harmless late-night appearance, another celebrity anecdote, another round of laughs, began to shift almost instantly. Corden leaned forward, his jokes sharpened, his questions rehearsed to poke fun. He wanted the audience on his side, laughing at the star who was too quiet, too serious, too strange for the Hollywood mold. But Keanu's silence was louder than comedy. Corden chuckled, glancing toward the crowd. "Keanu, mate, do you ever, I don't know, smile? You've got this whole brooding, monk thing going on, and I swear sometimes I wonder if you're acting or if you just forgot how to enjoy yourself." A ripple of uneasy laughter swept through the studio, the kind that sounded more like a question than a release. Keanu didn't flinch. He tilted his head slightly, the hint of a smile appearing, but it wasn't amusement. It was patience, the kind of patience that unnerved anyone who relied on control. Finally, his voice, deep and measured, broke through. "I enjoy life very much. I just don't think everything has to be a performance." The room shifted. The band members glanced at one another. The audience, caught between laughter and reflection, hesitated. Corden leaned back, mock-offended. "A performance? Come on, this is fun. We're all just having a laugh here, aren't we, folks?" His eyes darted to the crowd for reassurance. They clapped weakly, but the rhythm faltered. Keanu's gaze held steady. "Fun doesn't always mean making people the butt of a joke." The words landed like a gavel in a courtroom, quiet, deliberate, irreversible. The air thinned. Even those who had come to the studio expecting light-hearted comedy felt something different brewing, a confrontation, not of tempers, but of values. Keanu didn't need to raise his voice. His presence, his restraint, his refusal to bow to artificial charm was enough to tilt the balance of power. And in that instant, the show was no longer a late-night talk program. It was a stage where two opposing philosophies collided. One built on applause, the other built on silence. The battlefield had been drawn. The studio lights steadied, the crowd adjusted, and James Corden slipped back into the role he knew best. The jester, the puppet master, the man who always controlled the laughter in the room. He leaned on the desk with that familiar grin, bouncing in his chair as if the energy itself made him untouchable. For years, audiences had grown used to this rhythm. Corden's comedy came wrapped in bright colors and self-deprecating charm, but at its core, it thrived on something harsher. Guests became props, punchlines, stepping stones to his spotlight. A celebrity might arrive to promote a film, but they would leave having been measured against his jokes, whether they liked it or not. Tonight, his tactics rolled out with mechanical precision. He launched into one of his trademark routines, imitating Keanu's famously slow, reflective way of speaking. He dragged out syllables, widened his eyes, and turned Reeves's quiet nature into a caricature. The audience laughed, but their laughter was thinner than usual, a little too forced, like a sound effect rather than a reaction. Corden pushed harder, riding the wave. "I mean, Keanu, my guy, you've got, what, like 5 expressions? You're either shooting bad guys, looking sad on a bench, or staring into the abyss like someone stole your puppy. More laughter. Some genuine, some uneasy. The camera panned briefly to Keanu, who sat still, his hands folded neatly in his lap, expression unreadable. Corden chuckled at his own wit. Tell me, do you ever wake up in the morning and just go, "Today I'll try being a normal person," or is that too mainstream for you? The words landed sharp, carrying an edge that could easily be brushed off as a joke, but the undertone was clear. He wasn't teasing, he was belittling. Keanu's lips curved slightly, though not in amusement. It was the smile of a man who had lived through too much to be rattled by shallow provocation. His eyes stayed calm, almost sympathetic, as though he were watching someone perform a dance they didn't realize was hollow. The audience sensed it. The laughter came slower, punctured by moments of silence that the cameras couldn't hide. Attention lingered in the space, unspoken yet palpable. What happens when a man who thrives on mockery collides with a man who refuses to play along? Corden pressed again, doubling down. Come on, Keanu, you've got to admit, you're the most serious guy in Hollywood. I mean, you've been in, what, 30 films? And I don't think anyone's ever seen you crack a real smile. The audience turned, waiting. Would Keanu defend himself? Would he retreat into the safe, polite banter most guests used to survive? Instead, Keanu leaned forward, his voice measured, steady. I smile plenty, just not when someone asks me to. It was subtle, but it hit like a blade of truth. The laughter stopped altogether, leaving only the sound of shifting chairs and muffled coughs. Corden's grin twitched. He raised his eyebrows, pretending to laugh it off. Oh, okay, Mr. Mysterious. Ladies and gentlemen, watch out. He's edgy tonight. But the energy was different now. The balance of power had begun to tip ever so slightly. What once was routine, the host mocking, the audience laughing, the guest shrinking, was unraveling before their eyes. Corden tried to rally, moving into another bit, exaggerating Keanu's martial arts poses, mocking his monotone delivery in The Matrix. The band played a quick flourish to punctuate the joke, but the audience's laughter didn't quite return to form. Instead, they leaned forward, sensing something else at play. Because beneath the polished set and the polished jokes, a quiet storm was building, and Keanu Reeves, without raising his voice, was already beginning to change the script. The show pressed on, but the rhythm had shifted. Corden spoke faster, moving from joke to joke like a man running out of road, desperate to keep the machine humming. Yet no matter how brightly the lights burned or how loudly the audience clapped, one truth lingered in the air. Keanu Reeves was unmoved. He sat with a posture that radiated calm, shoulders relaxed, hands resting gently on his knees, his breathing steady. He wasn't resisting, nor was he surrendering. He was simply present. And that stillness unsettled Corden more than any comeback could have. Most celebrities who came to the show matched the host's energy. They laughed at the jokes, played along with the humiliation, clapped back with their own quips. That was the unspoken contract, entertainment over dignity. But Keanu didn't bend. He didn't rise to the bait, didn't shrink under the spotlight. He just existed, fully, unapologetically, himself. Corden leaned closer, eyes narrowing, searching for a crack. You know, mate, you're making my job really hard here. You're supposed to give me something to work with. A funny story, a silly reaction. Throw me a bone. Keanu tilted his head slightly, as though considering a puzzle, then softly, I thought the point was conversation, not performance. The words, calm as water, rippled across the room. No sharp edge, no raised voice. Just truth stated plainly. The crowd murmured, some chuckling nervously, others clapping before realizing they were breaking the rhythm of the show. Corden forced a laugh. Conversation? On late night? You must be new here. His tone was light, but the sweat at his temple betrayed him. Keanu didn't flinch. He leaned back in his chair, gaze drifting across the studio audience. His eyes seemed to meet them individually, as though he saw people, not a crowd. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, heavy with reflection, like a cathedral after the choir stopped singing. One woman in the front row whispered to her friend, It's like he's not even acting. He's just being. The cameras didn't catch it, but the sentiment spread like electricity. Corden tried again. He mimicked Keanu's stoic expression, freezing in mock seriousness. Look at me, everyone. I'm Keanu Reeves. I talk like this. I think about the universe. Blah, blah, blah. He broke into exaggerated poses, drawing forced laughter from a few corners of the audience. But the moment had already slipped away. The mockery felt cheap. Against Keanu's authenticity, the performance looked hollow, like a clown juggling in the middle of a funeral. Keanu finally spoke again, his tone warm, almost compassionate. You don't have to try so hard. Corden blinked, startled. Excuse me? You don't have to force it, Keanu continued, voice even, steady. People can feel when it's real. That's enough. The words hung in the air, undeniable. Corden chuckled nervously, but his eyes betrayed the sting. The audience shifted, caught between amusement and revelation. Keanu's stillness wasn't passive. It was powerful. It exposed the frantic energy around him for what it was. Desperation. The more he resisted the role of the clown, the more he revealed how fragile the mask of comedy could be. By saying little, by doing almost nothing, he had turned the stage into a mirror. And in that reflection, James Corden's carefully rehearsed act began to look less like entertainment and more like a plea for validation. The atmosphere in the studio grew taut, like a string stretched to the edge of breaking. Corden, unsettled by the way the crowd's loyalty had begun to wobble, decided to push harder. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk, eyes flashing with a forced playfulness that couldn't quite disguise the irritation beneath. Keanu, he said with a laugh that rang a little too loud. You've got this whole monk thing going on. All calm, all mysterious. But honestly, mate, don't you ever get bored of yourself? I mean, come on, you've been brooding for what, 30 years now? The audience chuckled, but uneasily. It wasn't the explosion of laughter Corden wanted, more like scattered sparks that fizzled before they could catch flame. Keanu lifted his gaze, calm and steady. You think that's all I am? The words were soft, almost a whisper, yet they carried through the studio like thunder. A pause followed, long enough for the cameras to catch Corden's flicker of discomfort before he forced another grin. Hey, I'm just having fun here, he insisted, holding his palms up. You know, breaking the ice, keeping it light, that's what people expect. Keanu leaned forward, his voice lower, more deliberate now. Do you ever stop to think about why people laugh, and if they're laughing with you? Or at you? The air froze. The crowd, trained to clap and chuckle on command, suddenly found themselves suspended in silence. Corden's grin faltered, then returned with an edge of defiance. Oh, so now you're the philosopher, huh? Come to teach me about comedy. His words were meant as a jab, but they trembled faintly, betraying the insecurity behind them. Keanu didn't flinch. Not comedy, respect. It landed like a gavel striking wood. The audience shifted in their seats, a murmur running through the rows. This wasn't banter anymore. It was a reckoning. Corden laughed again, too quickly this time. Respect. Mate, this is late-night television. People tune in for jokes, not lectures. He glanced at the crowd, desperate for their agreement. But the laughter didn't come. A few clapped awkwardly, the rest sat in silence, waiting. Keanu's voice broke through once more, steady and unyielding. Maybe they're tuning in for something real. The tension tightened further. Even the band, usually quick to punctuate a moment with cheerful notes, sat frozen. Cameras zoomed in on Keanu's face, catching the quiet intensity in his eyes. Corden shifted in his seat, trying to mask the discomfort with bravado. All right, Mr. Real. So tell me, what's real then? Sitting in silence, talking about sadness and philosophy while everyone's waiting to laugh. Keanu's gaze softened, almost kind. Real is when you don't have to make someone else smaller to feel bigger. Gasps rippled through the audience. Some broke into applause, tentative but genuine. Others simply sat still, processing what they had just heard. Corden's grin hardened, a mask refusing to crack. Wow, deep stuff, huh? Should we all sit around a campfire now and sing songs about our feelings? He tried to laugh it off, but his voice carried strain. The crowd didn't follow. Instead, their eyes stayed on Keanu. The silence stretched once more, no longer awkward but charged, like the air before a storm. This was no longer comedy. It was confrontation. And in that confrontation, Corden's grip on the stage, on the crowd, on the very rhythm of his show, began to slip. The first sparks of tension had ignited. The fire was only beginning. For a moment, the studio held its breath. The audience had laughed out of habit, then hesitated, then fallen silent altogether. Now, caught in the space between amusement and unease, they began to realize they were no longer watching a late-night segment. They were watching a duel, and they, the crowd, were the jury. James Corden, sensing the shift, leaned hard into his persona. He banged the desk lightly, forced a booming laugh, and gestured toward Keanu as if trying to reframe the mood. "Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for our favorite philosopher, Keanu Reeves, the man too cool to laugh, too serious to smile." Scattered claps rang out. A few laughed, but their voices cracked, betraying nerves. Others folded their arms, watching intently, unwilling to be dragged into the host's orbit. Keanu didn't pounce. He didn't need to. His silence pressed heavier than words. He sat with his calm half-smile, letting the tension breathe, letting the audience feel it for themselves. Finally, he leaned forward, voice low but steady. "I don't think people are here for me to smile on command. I think they're here because sometimes the truth matters more than the joke." The audience stirred. Someone in the second row clapped instinctively, and a ripple followed, hesitant at first, then growing louder, more certain. It wasn't the explosive cheer of a comedy gag. It was something deeper, a recognition. Corden blinked, caught off guard by the applause. He raised his hands, trying to spin it back. "Oh, look at that. He's got the crowd on his side. I guess I'm in trouble now, huh?" He forced a laugh, but the sound landed flat. Keanu didn't return the smile. His eyes swept across the crowd, not as an actor seeking adoration, but as a man connecting with individuals. The effect was profound. People leaned forward in their seats, drawn not to spectacle, but to sincerity. One woman whispered, "He's right," and though her voice never reached the microphones, it echoed in the silence of the room. Corden shifted, tugging at his suit jacket. His jokes, usually smooth, came with hesitation now. "So what, Keanu? You think comedy's bad? You think we're all just bullies here, making fun of people?" Keanu shook his head, slow and deliberate. "No. Comedy can be beautiful, it can heal, it can bring people together. But when it comes from a place of cruelty, it's not comedy. It's just cruelty." Applause broke again, stronger this time. The studio crew glanced nervously at each other. This wasn't in the script. The rhythm of late night, setup, punchline, applause, had been shattered. In its place was something raw, unpredictable. Corden's eyes flicked to the band as if begging for a cue to rescue him. The band leader gave a half-hearted rimshot, but it sounded hollow, swallowed by the weight of the room. The crowd was no longer automatic. They weren't laughing on command. They weren't clapping because a sign told them to. They were choosing, and more, they were choosing Keanu. Corden's grin strained, his jaw tightening. "All right, mate, fair. Enough. You've got your truth. But at the end of the day, this is still my show." Keanu nodded, serene as ever. "And maybe tonight, it's about more than a show." The audience erupted again, not in wild cheering, but in a deliberate, sustained applause that carried the unmistakable sound of people taking sides. The balance had shifted. The crowd, once Corden's greatest weapon, was slipping from his control. They weren't laughing at Keanu anymore. They were listening to him. And in that listening, James Corden's empire of laughter began to crumble. The applause lingered longer than usual, swelling until even the stagehands backstage paused to listen. For once, the momentum of a late-night show did not belong to the host. It belonged to the guest who hadn't cracked a joke, hadn't raised his voice, hadn't even tried to be entertaining. Corden drummed his fingers on the desk, trying to mask his unease with a chuckle. All right, philosopher Keanu. You've got the crowd clapping like we're in church. But this is comedy, mate, not a TED Talk." Keanu's gaze didn't waver. He let the laughter fade, let the silence return. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but every word carried weight. Comedy is powerful. But when it turns people into targets, it stops being funny. It starts being cruelty dressed as entertainment. The audience stirred again, murmurs spreading. Someone clapped, then another, until the sound grew into an unscripted applause that drowned out the forced rhythm of the show. Corden tried to laugh it off, his grin stretching thin. Cruelty? Come on. Nobody's cruel here. We're just joking, mate. That's what I do. Keanu leaned forward, his hands clasped loosely. Jokes don't erase the impact. People remember how you make them feel. Do they leave feeling seen or feeling smaller? The words were not loud, not angry, but they cut deeper than any insult could. The crowd quieted, waiting, holding on to the moment as if they knew it would matter beyond the walls of the studio. Corden's shoulders stiffened. He forced a laugh. All right, Mr. Enlightenment. What do you want me to do then, huh? Sit here and just talk about feelings all night? That's not what people tune in for. Keanu's eyes softened, almost compassionate. People tune in for connection. They want to feel like they're part of something real. Laughter's beautiful when it's shared. But when it's forced, when it's built on someone else's pain, it's not connection. It's exploitation. A ripple of applause rolled through the audience, stronger this time, bolder. The energy was shifting fully now, as if the crowd itself had been waiting for someone to articulate what they had always felt but never voiced. Corden's grin cracked at the edges. He straightened, trying to reassert authority. Exploitation. That's a heavy word, Keanu. You make it sound like I'm some kind of villain here. Keanu didn't blink. I'm not calling you a villain. I'm saying we all have choices. Every word we speak, every laugh we chase, it shapes how people see themselves. That's not just entertainment. That's responsibility. The audience erupted again, this time with cheers mixed into the applause. The camera panned across faces lit with something more than amusement. It was recognition, even relief. For the first time, Corden faltered openly. His eyes darted toward the producers at the edge of the set, as if searching for a lifeline, but none came. The show had slipped from his grasp. He tried to laugh, but the sound came brittle. So what, you think you've figured it all out? You're the truth teller now, the guy who knows better than everyone else? Keanu shook his head, his tone steady as stone. No, I don't know better. I just know what matters, and what matters isn't applause, it's dignity. The line hung in the air like scripture. The audience clapped again, this time rising from their seats. It wasn't a standing ovation born of spectacle. It was something raw, unchoreographed, defiant. Corden froze, caught in the storm he could no longer control. His usual rhythm, joke, laugh, applause, had been dismantled. In its place stood a man whose stillness had bloomed into strength, whose words had pierced through the glittering facade of late-night comedy. The philosophical strike had landed, and with it, James Corden's grip on the stage, and on the crowd, had fractured beyond repair. James Corden shifted in his chair, tugging at the lapels of his suit as though straightening fabric could straighten the chaos unraveling in front of him. The audience had just given Keanu an ovation, unlike anything he had seen on his own stage. It wasn't for a punchline, not for a skit, but for a truth so raw it silenced the room before it set it on fire. Corden's instincts screamed at him, regain control, pull them back, drown the moment with laughter. So he did what he always did. He leaned into the bit. All right, he said, with exaggerated enthusiasm, clapping his hands together. Enough of the wisdom hour. Let's have some fun, yeah? He turned to the band. Hit it, boys. The brass kicked in, drums rolling, lights flashing as a pre-scripted segment began. A big screen behind them lit up with goofy graphics. Keanu, or not Keanu. Corden explained the game with manic cheer. We're going to show photos of random guys on the street and you tell us, is it Keanu or not Keanu? The audience laughed on cue, but the sound lacked conviction. It was habit, not joy. Corden barreled ahead. Okay, picture one. A grainy photo of a man with long hair appeared. Is this you, Keanu, or just some bloke who shops at Hot Topic? The crowd chuckled weakly. Keanu studied the screen, then smiled politely. Not me. Correct, Corden cheered, slamming a buzzer. The band played a flourish. All right. Photo 2. Another face appeared, this time an obvious look-alike in sunglasses. Keanu's voice remained steady. Not me either. Again the buzzer. Again the flourish. Again the laughter that sounded